Day two?
Day two. Hard work getting out of bed this morning. I tell you, my head last night would not stop spinning. And that's not from drinking, I might add. We were very well behaved last night, but just the ideas and thinking.
Yeah. Day two kicked off straight into parallel sessions. I spent the first session hearing from a range of speakers and panelists around the impact that AV is having on public transit ridership. There's a lot of work underway. There's a lot of studies underway. There was some concern around the granularity of data to sort of back up some of the conclusions, but the numbers are kind of saying that in those key markets where there's at least ride share at the moment, and of course this session was around what might shared AVs have an impact on public transit. Just the shared vehicles, they call them the TNCs, the transportation network companies like Uber and Lyft, they are showing drop in public transit ridership. So a little bit of cause for concern there, but that very quickly turned to, well, if that's sort of how the trend is going, what additional benefit could be extracted from the conversion to AVs? And so there was a good conversation around, the place of autonomous shared vehicles. Is it first and last mile? Is it the main part of the trip? Do they take over parts of BRT systems? So a lot of early thinking, early research showing potential public transit ridership going down. Obviously demonstrating that policymakers need to sharpen our pencil early on making sure that doesn't get too far from us.
And I sat in on a sharing economy discussion covering off Airbnbs fundamentally, but a range of other sort of sharing economy principles as they work to our cities, both research into the impact on property and potential rent increases across cities, but then, the Airbnb guy, their legal counsel for the state of Oregon was here talking about, what does it mean to come in for them to come into cities, and then the planners talking about how they've adapted their strategies and are bringing it in as a core part of their housing strategy. And again, it's that level of discussion I think is interesting in Australia, because I know this stuff is current in a few councils I'm dealing with. They're trying to figure out how they outlaw it because they're just getting complaints and problems, which is a really sure. I don't dispute that, but these guys have moved from that to how do we embrace it and turn it into a housing solution, because there's it was a really interesting conversation of how they move and the importance of a sharing economy, because it's, again, a lot of the conversations around the sociological, what does society want, we're providing services that people want, yet regulators are trying to stamp that out. So they're like going, well, this is the way people want to engage and travel and be accommodated, so we better just learn how to make it the best fit for our cities.
I transitioned to a session on real estate development in a post-AV world, and so it was around car parking. So what do we do when car parking kind of isn't necessarily king anymore? And it was an amazing session because they were all developers. Okay, there's one consultant, 3 developers, and some phenomenal perspectives. There was one developer, local Portland developer, national developer, but doing work in Portland housing development. And they had a project out on Division where they wanted 0 car parking. Now, the city of Portland doesn't have any minimum car parking requirements, but it was the financier of the project that was essentially refusing to fund the project because there was no car parking. And they flew Wells Fargo up to Portland, and they sat the guy on the Burnside Bridge to sit there and watch the number of bikes that streamed through the city from the east side neighbourhoods into downtown. And of course the project ended up getting funded without that. So it's interesting how you got to show people.
Which is a good segue back to one of the things which came up yesterday, which we didn't really talk about in yesterday's summary of the video, was these potential impacts on government revenue by changes to property development fundamentals. And if we don't need the car parking, and car parking occupies 30 to 40% of our footprints in most cities, and all of a sudden you can feed that as land stock back into the system without having to grow on the edges, is it possible that from a pure supply and demand perspective that we'll feed 30% new land into the development market, and then we'll have some pretty significant drops in land prices, and what's the impact on land tax and rates and revenues. So there was a pretty interesting conversation yesterday on that, but I guess that's a sort of a fine by.
I think we're going to hear more around that one.
Yeah, and I kind of then, when I was sitting in on a session called The Future of the Curb, which, I thought my mind was blown yesterday, but that today has just been the best session I think I've ever been in. We had Uber.
It's the curb.
The curb, or the footpath for us Aussies. But basically a really deep discussion on the challenges and of how we deal with shared mobility and right of access to the footpath and curb space, and dealing with traffic capacity, and how do we get access. And this really interesting conversation around autonomous vehicles. If they're coming, they're going to need to be able to get to the footpath to drop people on and off. They can't do what we currently do, which is stop in the middle of traffic and park. But again, they're trialling stuff here that around shared mobility drop-off and pick-up zones, or PUDOs as they call them. I love a good acronym.
Acronyms. The other good acronym I heard was SHAVODs.
Yeah. Shared
Autonomous Vehicle Oriented Development.
Yeah, there's been some good ones. So look, there's really deep discussion on the future of the curb and trials that a lot of the cities are doing here around how to deal more effectively, and then some complex discussions around sort of paid access. Do mobility services, Uber for us at home, need to start paying for access to the curb, and start. It's part of a more deeper conversation around travel demand management that they're having, and again, effectively congestion charging. But there's some really, they're doing it more than anything. They're not just talking about it. And I think that's kind of, again, the difference between us at home. These guys are actually doing stuff. There's trials that are actively out there. They've got research. They're crunching some numbers, and some really cool stuff.
Yeah. So that was the morning. We've just literally walked out of our first ever pilot version of the Future Street Masterclass.
Yeah.
3 hours we had about 30 people. We had developers, engineers, urban planners, urban designers, policymakers, landscape architects. How do you feel it went?
Not too bad for a first attempt.
Yeah.
I think it was great beyond anything just to share what we did.
Yeah.
And it's kind of always nice when you go back and deliver it and you remind yourself, shit, we actually did something pretty freaking amazing.
Yeah.
And particularly when you got other people from, here in America coming up to you and going, that's amazing. And I think we kind of knew at the time we were doing something that had never been done before, but to have it reaffirmed is nice. I think the masterclass was really good. I think people gave us some great feedback at the end. Got some, in our spirit of honesty, we've got some tweaks to go before we bring it home to Australia. But I think it was pretty good, and it's really pleasing to kind of see that there's interest in it. I think you finished the day with a quick show of hands. How many people think they might take this back to their city or town or institution and try and do it? And I think most people said they'd have a crack at it. And then on the spectrum of how many people think they'll be successful at it, I think the average score of 1 to 10 was sort of a 5 or a 6.
5 or 6, yeah.
If you had half that room attempt to do it and pull something off, then I think we've progressed the movement.
Yeah, and I think if we also get others attempting or engaging around the idea of Future Street and share that, we're building the body of knowledge. So I'm looking forward to building up the Future Street website as well with our partners.
That was kind of a blending of our event in the afternoon and then my curb session in the morning. Was what's missing now is some really solid, almost updated design manuals on what the future of the footpath and the curb and streets need to be to suit a modern city. Our idea of adapting or putting protected bike lanes back into cities might need to change if we're starting to deal with autonomous vehicles that want and need to go to a curb, and how we segregate, and then how we put smart in city and tech. And I think that was something that most people felt was missing. Was they go, I've got a pretty good feel of complete streets. We've been doing that for 20 years. We've got a pretty good feel of how to do the green part, but what we don't understand is how to weave the tech into the built environment. And if someone could do a sort of a tech overlay design manual for us. And so I think there's some stuff for us to go back home and think about how we put that in.
Well, that's right. I think that was very clearly, I said, who knows what the Internet of Things is, and there's sort of like 30 hands kind of go up. I've heard of that word, and who really knows what that means and how it works, and maybe half the room kind of put their hand up. But very clear message for me that those city shaping professions who are responsible for shaping and planning and designing our cities, vertical and horizontal infrastructure, we've still got a way to go in terms of some basics around what the Internet of Things is, its benefits and opportunities, and as you say, some of those fundamental sort of design specification opportunities that they need to look out for early to avoid potential, tearing stuff up later on, losing opportunities and things like that. Yeah.
Another big day. Done.
Another big day, exhausted. Final plenary tomorrow. Looking forward to sort of seeing how it all wraps up, and we'll deliver our third and final edition of 10 Minute Cities then.
Until then.
Okay.